Here in Downing Street, Britain's Prime Minister has remained defiant in the face of growing pressure to stop arms exports to Saudi Arabia, defending the sales amid evidence of war crimes and civilian deaths in Yemen. The UK has increased its weapons sales massively since the onset of the Saudi invasion, according to a report by a British newspaper. The UK has already sold billions of pounds worth of arms to Saudi Arabia. While the British Prime Minister welcomed the Saudi Crown Prince to Downing Street, anti-war activists demonstrated near Parliament and said they would protest against Riyadh and London's roles in the war on Yemen. Yet at the very same time, positive images of the Crown Prince were all over London, provoking social media users to say the British capital looked like Riyadh. In a countermeasure by anti-Saudi activists, buses spent 2 days touring London with banners accusing bin Salman of war crimes. The British Prime Minister defended Britain's links to Saudi Arabia. However, Saudi Arabia and its allies launched the war on Yemen in March 2015 to reinstall its former Riyadh-friendly government. In heated exchanges in Parliament, the British Prime Minister defended the country's military links to Saudi Arabia, saying Saudi intelligence sharing has saved the lives of potentially hundreds of British citizens. But many members of the British public simply reject these justifications, arguing that British policy towards Saudi Arabia is helping to kill civilians in Yemen. Why is the British Prime Minister so supportive of the UK-Saudi relationship? And should Britain continue to sell more weapons to Saudi Arabia in the first place? Simple questions with important answers. In the run-up to the Saudi Crown Prince's visit, London was decorated with portraits of the Crown Prince bearing complimentary messages. The royal's pictures were even on taxi cabs. What does the public here in London think of this? We asked them.
Why we do it? Probably because, like I think you mentioned earlier, the oil. Obviously, you know, we're a big oil importer, so having close relations with them is probably of benefit to us.
It's to do with hypocrisy between the approach to certain despots and others. That we seem to favour the Saudis because it's in our financial interest, but other tyrants, if you like, or other despots who are doing exactly the same thing, they incur our displeasure because we're not in the same financial relationship with them.
I'm not sure about charm effect offensive with anybody. I think you've got to be... It's very difficult. I wouldn't like to be a politician because you don't really know.
I don't know because I didn't see the content of the poster, so I wouldn't know.
Absolutely fine. I mean, interested to engage and hear and see what's going on in Saudi Arabia. So, yeah, interested.
Personally, I mean, I think it's cosmetic. I mean, it's a country that runs the way that country runs, and I'm not casting any judgment on that. We may in the West consider it to be wrong. However, in the context of where that operates, it may not be wrong. But I think what's disappointing is the way that we, in terms of the virtues that like the West espouses, I think there's much more of a principled stand that we need to take.
Well, it makes me feel what I feel already is that the nation state doesn't exist anymore and everything is economic and commercial.
It makes me feel that anyone who's rich and wants a bit of fame can just smother himself around and, yeah, catch some attention.
The Saudi Crown Prince's visit to UK was marred by a lot of controversy. Yes, there were billboards and images of him in many streets paid for by the Saudi government. A lot of them in newspapers, on television, and also on billboards. But also there were other images depicting him as a war criminal, as a vicious man, as a man who will never be able to undertake reform in the Saudi kingdom. So it is clear that a man who feels that he needs to spend millions in order to enhance his image is a bankrupt person. And I do not believe that helped him very much, that those those images helped him and his image very much.
It sounds like someone who we call in English Billy No Mates, who sends himself 100 birthday cards. Obviously, he was very nervous about what was going on in London because he knew he's just simply not welcome. That was made very clear to him in social media and also mainstream media, who got very interested in the movement. This has been going on from early January this year. And so he was meant to come at the end of January. And when he saw this strong movement against him, he changed his plan to February. And then we continued the campaign up the game by actually submitting even a case to the court to make sure that we made a clear, send out a clear message to him that he's not welcome in Britain because he's the architect of this suffering in Yemen. And then eventually he had no choice but to buy his way in. As he did, he spent millions of pounds to get black cabs to say Prince is welcome. No, black cabs just want money. Is Billy No Mate sending himself 100 birthday cards?
Why, in the public's view, has Theresa May defended the links between Britain and Saudi Arabia?
Well, I think they're about to spend a lot of money on guns and arms from us. So there's obviously a lot of trade links there that she wants to keep positive, and so yeah, probably for trade mainly, I think.
Finance, jobs, money. I don't think there's any great sort of political compatibility between the two sides. I think it's all down to sort of financial gain, financial advantage.
Money. Because she's got to have, with Brexiting, we've got to have friends somewhere. So the best thing to do is to try all things and see what works, possibly.
Because that's her position, so she'd have to defend it to keep political credibility.
I think that only by dialogue will they be encouraged to tone it down a bit, yeah.
If you have nations that we don't have a good relationship or against, you're almost confined to continue that as well. It's very, very difficult to see how you can break out that cycle. But unfortunately, there's a lot of money involved. And I think that's trumped everything, to pardon the pun.
Well, she has interest in her party has interest in and it's how relationships are built, and yeah, she's just defending her relationships. Whether they're good or not, that's for her to judge.
Well, Theresa May had no choice but to appear to be defending the Saudi position, especially in Yemen and the war and the aggression on Yemen. But at the same time, I believe she must have exerted a lot of pressure on him to stop that aggressive war, because there is a lot of pressure on her to withdraw from the alliance and to stop arming the Saudis. And the confrontation in the Prime Minister's question time at the Parliament on the day he was here showed how encircled she was by the opposition, who wanted that this support for the Saudis be ended. Now, she had to pretend to be supporting him, but at the same time, she exerted the pressure on him to end the war, and this is what we saw afterwards. Immediately, he had he went back and started negotiations with the Houthis, or the Ansarullah movement in Yemen.
Of course, politically, she has to do that because she has economic interests, not political or humanitarian or anything else. It's nothing to do, nothing personal. It's to do with economic interests. And Theresa May is more interested, being a Tory and capitalist by nature, she's more interested in making economic deals that would benefit Britain, especially in light of Britain's Brexit from the European Union, as well as needing to attract business here. Of course, we've seen how she has made a huge deal in terms of sales of arms, typhoons and whatnot, to go and kill more babies and women in Yemen, that's all. And so, yeah, a special relationship. You see, you also have to look back at the history. The history is that this evil, vile regime in Saudi Arabia was planted by the British system in the first place. And symbolically, she gave him a family tree, did she not? Going back to Victorian times. This family tree is symbolic to him that as we have planted you, we can unplant you. Therefore, you better do business with us.
Since Saudi and its allies launched a war on Yemen, causing over 13,600 Yemenis to be killed, including civilians, women and children, many human rights laws appear to have been violated. In the public's opinion, should the United Kingdom sell more weapons to Saudi?
It's positives and negatives. Obviously, the revenue we get from that is beneficial depending on where it's spent. But you don't want to be promoting gun violence and deaths in wars around the world. So
I don't approve of the connection between the countries being entirely financially based rather than ethically or morally based. So on an ethical and moral basis, I wouldn't support arming the Saudis.
Do not.
Why not?
Because I don't agree with war. I think we've got to practice talking to people and not fighting and killing people. Full stop.
But it's quite profitable for us to sell those weapons.
I know it is, but that doesn't mean it's right. It's quite profitable to go to a lot of places that I don't go to because I don't like their morals.
I think that we should suspend arms sales in any of those kind of circumstances where we have the power to do so. And it is going to affect the arms industry here. But there is suffering in Yemen the same way as there's suffering in Syria, both of which we know that Russia and also Syria are complicit.
Definitely, yeah. No one should die in a war. I mean, war shouldn't even happen. It's just a lack of skills of communication. And that's where the feminine movement and the whole kind of respect towards women should be addressed.
I don't think we should sell weapons to anybody. You know, we've never learnt, have we, by anything in history? I mean, war just is repeating itself.
Well, I believe that it is clear now that the Saudis are using weapons for the wrong reasons and for immoral aims. And you cannot trust them with weapons. And that is becoming even more dangerous now that the Saudis are aspiring to achieve a nuclear project. Now, this nuclear project is very serious and should not be trusted in the hands of people who just go and wage war in Bahrain, intervening military in Bahrain, and then on Yemen, then threatening Qatar with military action. I believe that they had so much arms supplies that they need to curtail, the West needs to curtail the supply of weapons to the Saudis because it does not serve the peace and tranquility of the region and of the world.
Well, okay, why don't we just release all murderers from Belmarsh and elsewhere and give them lots of weapons to go and play with it in the common gardens and Hyde Park and elsewhere? What do you think is that going to be if the Prime Minister today declared that we're going to release all long-term prisoners, especially ones facing life sentences for murder and such like violent crimes, and give them arsenal of weapons? That is exactly what I think of selling weapons to a rogue regime like the Saudi regime is, because by law you are not allowed to sell weapons to a regime that uses those instruments to repress its own people or to commit acts of aggression. Now, Saudi Arabia is guilty of both. It hasn't just encroached upon Yemen, it has also encroached upon Bahrain. For 7 years, people are being tortured. Men are being raped with batons inside prison cells. Now, how can you sell weapons to such regimes? You see, the crimes being committed in Bahrain is attributable to the Saudi regime. Likewise, the crimes being committed in Libya, Syria, as well as Yemen. Of course, Yemen is the worst of them all.
Let's look at the relationship between the UK and Saudi Arabia in numbers. Britain is agreeing a deal to sell 48 Typhoon aircraft to Riyadh. The UK has increased its weapons sales by around 500% since the onset of the Saudi invasion of Yemen. Sales already amount to more than £6 billion of arms to Saudi Arabia. And there's one more number. Over 13,600 Yemenis have already died, and that figure is rising. Are historical ties between countries enough of a reason to roll out the red carpet and support potential war criminals? We asked the public.
Definitely not. I mean, Trump's only been president for a year and a bit or whatever. and we already seem to have made our mind up about him. So why should, just because historically we got on well with them, I think it should be about what their recent actions have been. Okay, Trump has a past, but we've got to keep close to the US, and we seem to be very negative towards him. But like you say, when the Saudi prince came, the red carpet was rolled out, and a state visit with the Queen and whatever. But so I think it's a bit hypocritical, really.
No, I mean, I don't see the relevance of historical connections once you've passed a certain period of time. No, that just doesn't work for me.
Depends what the historical ties are. It depends what the crazy stuff they've done abroad, and it depends what the evidence is about the stuff that they've done abroad. I don't know the evidence, so it's hard to make a judgment.
That we throw it under, well, I've said before, do I think it's a good idea? You've got to be diplomatic. So there's just simple diplomacy. Do I think it's a good idea to engage and listen to what's going on? Yes, I do.
No, I don't believe it does. I think in that sense, it follows along a little bit what I'm saying. I mean, you will have diplomatic relations, and I think it's almost going too far to show the effort, just how friendly we really are. It's over-egging it. In fact, a much better impact might have been achieved if it had been a little bit more low-key.
I think every situation should be addressed separately and should be evaluated separately. So going to that statement is a bit immature, I think. But I mean, maybe that was addressed and investigated as she wanted to, but I don't know.
I think we should be polite to anybody that comes here, or we should say to people, no, you shouldn't come. Don't come, you won't be welcome. Like a certain person sitting having tea at the moment in a country to the east.
Of course, countries cherish the relationships, especially if they go back some time in the past. However, there is always a need for re-evaluating these relations. And once the other party appears to be committing crimes, to be immorally behaving, then there should be an immediate stop to that respect to people who deserve to be tried for war crimes or for crimes against humanity. Like the King of Bahrain, when he comes here in May, he should not be offered a red carpet reception because he has committed crimes against humanity. Torture is a crime against humanity. War crimes in Yemen are war crimes that need to have a special tribunal. There should be an international war tribunal for Yemen in which Mohammed bin Salman and his cliques must appear and answer for the crimes they have committed against the Yemenis.
Not at all. Not at all. You see, today you are my friend and you come across as a decent person. But if I see you behaving in an atrocious, unhuman and illegal way, I have no choice but to cut you off. Why? Because I have to protect my own reputation. I don't want to be hanging around with a gangster, a nasty person. I will advise you. And if you don't comply with my advice, then I have nothing to do with you. You see, in our faith, we're also advised not to hang around with people who are dodgy, because their dodgy behavior creeps upon you without your realizing. So we have to be careful who our friends are, not only because it is good for us in the long term, but also it has a negative impact on our relations with others. It destroys our reputation. We say in English, tell me who your friends are, I'll tell you who you are. So if you hang around with a bunch of mafiosi from Italy or elsewhere, what am I going to say about you? I'm going to assume that you are a criminal like them, and I'm not going to trust you. I don't want to do business with you. I'll cut you off like I would cut them off. So it is not an excuse to hang around rampant murderers just because I used to know them when I was a child at school.
What would the public advise the UK to do instead of selling more arms to Saudi Arabia?
I think financial services, insurance, I think we have a lot of other things to offer rather than arms. We could be doing far better things than just throwing them with weapons all the time. So
maybe because of historical connections and empire, etc., the idea of this country moralizing to another country, that's not a comfortable position to take either. I think possibly you stand back and let the Saudis do what the Saudis do within their own country. I don't think it's for this country to lecture them.
I think advice and negotiations are always a good point. I don't know if it's instead of or as well as or a reduction of weapons, but certainly to discuss human rights and other ways forward is going to be always a good thing.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you shouldn't be, we shouldn't be selling weapons. We shouldn't be being doing the stuff that we all know is hypocritical and wrong, and it suits us for the economy. But there's plenty of other things, wrongly, by the way, that we do. So that's not just with Saudi Arabia.
Realistically, it's difficult to see how you can make an absolute radical change overnight. I don't think either country would be able to just cease trading, and that might be the right thing to do, but you probably wouldn't see that as realistic. So reduce it, have strings and ties on it, certain kinds of weapons that can be used for certain purposes, possibly, but wow, if I've solved it all, there we go.
Well, I think that the only thing that matters is communication, and the only thing that matters is starting a conversation. And we often are offended, either individually or as nations, by something that somebody didn't actually mean. I'm not saying that the war or selling arms it's pretty obvious what they want to do with them, but you have to have conversations, you have to keep talking, you have to stop.
Well, I think we need a lot of our women to go over there and help perhaps with the driving lessons. I think that would be a really good idea.
I think UK is well positioned to contribute to a peaceful settlement of disputes in that region. Unfortunately, it is not doing that. It should intervene until the Saudis to stop executing people, to give real reform to the women's rights, not just to allow them driving, which is in every country in the world. They should intervene in Bahrain and say, look, you must not continue to hold thousands of people just because they had expressed their opinion. You must release Nabil Rajab, Sheikh Ali Salman, Hassan Mushayma, Abdul Wahab Hussein, and others. You must stop racial discrimination and also stop changing demographic change. For the Saudis, they must stop all these problems with their neighbors, intervening in the neighbors, and also the UAE must also stop. So the UK is well positioned to play a real and objective and humane role in the region. It is not doing it, but I hope if Jeremy Corbyn wins, he may be able to have to provide a different framework of policy in the Middle East.
Cut political ties straight away and just use the pen they're holding at the UN Security Council and say, well, you either stop the breaches of international humanitarian laws, say, for example, because that's a blatant example of Yemen, or we're going to pass a resolution imposing severe sanctions on you, close all the doors for you, we will cut all political support, logistics, intelligence support for you, and leave you isolated, and you can't afford to do that. And like we were saying earlier, since they planted him, they can unplant him. And they know that. That's why they gave him this tree, family tree, a reminder for him. You see, don't get too ambitious on us. And therefore, what I think the UK government should do to preserve its own dignity and self-respect is to say an ultimatum to the Saudi regime, either or. And if it complies, fair enough. That I'm talking about internal repression issues, that is rights of the Eastern Province people, rights of all citizens there, and also the migrant workers and women, as well as their relationship with their neighbors, such as Bahrain and Yemen in particular. So they fail to do that, then I will go ahead and pass a resolution. That's not going to make them feel comfortable at all. They will stop doing what they're doing instantly. I know they're terrified of Britain.
The British Prime Minister said she would raise humanitarian concerns about Yemen with bin Salman, and said arms sales to Saudi Arabia were strictly regulated. But she also underlined her government's support for the Saudi-led war on Yemen, claiming the campaign has been supported by the UN Security Council.
And so the Saudi Crown Prince visited the UK, and arms deals continue to flow. Amnesty International has stated selling more fighter planes to a country leading a military coalition that is already laying waste to homes, hospitals and schools in Yemen is just adding fuel to a humanitarian fire. It's dangerous to play with fire at the best of times, but this time The flames that are being fanned may fill bank accounts in Britain, but they kill civilians in Yemen.